Welcome to the FYREBIRDS, time traveling through history, one era at a time. I'm Kate Armstrong. Why, hello there. I'm currently off on maternity leave, but I've decided to pull some special bonus episodes out of the Patreon vault during September for all my listeners to enjoy. This one's going to take us back to our season on the Tudors. Let's find out why Elizabeth I was so very fond of pirates? Don't worry, patrons. You're also about to get a brand new bonus episode, so keep your ears peeled. Now, grab your swabbing stick and some sea legs. Let's go traveling. An Irish woman waits by a grand palace door. It's strange, she thinks. She's spent most of her life on the high seas having adventures, and now she is here waiting to be seen by a queen. She isn't afraid. She requested this audience. On her ship, she rules with an iron fist. She's a famous pirate, an avenger of murdered husbands, a scourge of the British. In all the ways that matter, this woman is also a queen. But the English monarch, anointed by God, is one of the most powerful women in the world. She rules the country that has caused Grania Niwalia so much heartache. This queen's captains have taken her lands and imprisoned her son, relentless in their pursuit of her. And so she has come here for justice, restitution, and she isn't afraid to speak her mind. The door opens. In she strides, eyes up, ready to bargain. She's about to make Elizabeth I the deal of her life. In this episode, we're going to learn just how highly Elizabeth I prized her pirates. And we'll meet some of the women plying their trade on the high seas. So, grab your favorite ruff, an eye patch, and your sharpest sword. Let's go sailing. Before we meet our seafaring ladies, let's get a glimpse at the situation in Elizabeth's England at large. When Elizabeth I took the throne in 1558, her country was plagued with problems, one of which was imminent war with mighty Spain. Spain had been having a bit of a glow-up, its coffers overflowing with riches thanks to the conquistadors who sacked the Aztec and Incan empires. In contrast, England was broke, its navy tiny. If Catholic Spain decided to invade Protestant England, Elizabeth was in a world of hurt. But Spain wasn't Lizzie's biggest headache. Nope, that was her pirates. Well, not her pirates. Between 1650 and 1720, thousands of sea raiders terrorized the waters of the Caribbean, during a period that would come to be known as the Golden Age of Piracy. But in Elizabeth's time, the British Isles were already teeming with over 1,500 active pirates, all hell-bent on plundering its coasts and ports. Even the River Thames wasn't immune. River pirates were a common nuisance. Get out from up under my skirts, son! Elizabeth's early reign saw so many complaints about piracy that the Crown was forced to launch several investigations, which only managed to reveal large-scale corruption. It turns out that pirates were frequently bankrolled by government officials who supported their illegal operations for a percentage of the profits. Better raise those government wages, Elizabeth. Imagine you are Elizabeth I. You've got virtually no navy, no money for a navy, and King Philip II of Spain is preparing to invade your country with a powerful armada. You've also got hundreds of murderous, thieving pirates preying on your populace. What do? It turns out you savvily issue a decree. As long as pirates stop attacking British citizens and start preying on Spanish ships, and give a portion of the booty to the Crown, of course, piracy is legal, encouraged. In fact, it's downright patriotic. In one move, Lizzie gained a navy to fight the Spanish and a massive source of income. That's some very creative problem solving right there. No navy? No problem. In order to defend her country, Elizabeth channeled the energy of a bunch of criminals by instituting a system known as privateering. Look, it's perfectly legal to do the plundering, as long as you do it under certain circumstances. Private companies were allowed to form expeditions to capture Spanish ships and bring home their treasures. Many of these business ventures were joint stock companies in which respectable members of society, including the Queen herself, purchased shares to bankroll these pirates. Sorry, privateers. Does this sound morally shaky and legally sketchy? Good, you're getting the idea. There was a very fine line between pirate and privateer. They both robbed ships, but only one of them did it with the express permission of Queen Elizabeth I. To become a privateer, all you needed was a privately owned ship, preferably armed, and a letter of reprisal from a royal official, bearing the crown seal, which gave you permission to interrupt and capture enemy shipping in a time of declared war. England and Spain were not technically in a state of open warfare just yet, but, semantics. This practice of privateering had been around for a long time in England, from at least the 13th century, but it was only after 1585 that letters of reprisal allowed enemy treasure to be confiscated by an admiralty court. Admiralty courts required privateer captains to bring their seized booty, including treasure and captured ships, back to the ports in order to have them inventoried. The courts would then split up the loot, with half going to the privateers and the other half going straight into the royal coffers. Thank you for your very generous and mandatory donation. Since privateering crews were not salaried, but received a percentage of the spoils, they had plenty of incentive to throw themselves into their work with great enthusiasm. One might say, too much of it. And there was plenty of work to be found. The Spanish had pilfered plenty of gold, silver, and jewels from the Americas, all of which had to cross pirate-infested waters to reach Spain. In the first half of the colonial period, Spain's colonies sent nearly 181 tons of gold and 16,000 tons of silver across the seas to Europe in large ships called galleons. These galleons would often stop off at the Caribbean islands to load up on supplies before making the long journey back to Spain, where English pirates were waiting, all too eager to help lighten the load. So many successful pirate attacks were staged in the Atlantic that armed vessels began accompanying Spanish galleons for protection. The moral of the story? Crime pays. English piratical profits soared. In just a few short years, pirates brought in about 400,000 pounds, or more than $106 million today. One of Elizabeth's favorite pirates, Francis Drake, brought in 100,000 pounds worth of gold coins from one such expedition, about 26 million today. Think of all the fancy kirtles one could purchase with such riches. By 1590, Elizabeth's personal investments in privateering amounted to more than 200,000 pounds. One ambassador wrote, "Nothing is thought to have enriched the English more, or done so much to allow many individuals to amass the wealth they are known to possess, as the wars with the Spanish in the time of Queen Elizabeth." In other words, Elizabeth's pirates are making bank. And privateering soon became a recognized profession, and an excellent means by which to socially advance. Looting Spanish ships in the service of Her Majesty was one of the best ways that young men of modest backgrounds could forge respected careers, amass small fortunes, and even become celebrities. And if you were an especially gifted plunderer, you might even be able to meet the Queen herself. Elizabeth's Sea Dogs, a group of sea captains whose pirate activities provided a huge source of income, were often dispatched on the down low to fight in skirmishes against the Spanish Navy. These sea dogs included Sir Thomas Cavendish, who was knighted for lining the English treasury with captured Spanish booty. The official reason for his knighthood was his 26-month navigation stint, but we all know what's up. There was also Sir John Hawkins, who helped England break into the lucrative slave trade by stealing and kidnapping Africans and selling them to the Americas. Not a cute look, John. The most favored of the sea dogs, though, was also the most famous pirate of the age, Sir Francis Drake. From 1577 to 1580, he circumnavigated the globe, committing blatant acts of piracy along the way. When the Spanish formally complained, Elizabeth responded that there was nothing she could do. He was a private citizen, after all, acting on his own accord. She neglected to mention that she'd given Drake her personal support and financial backing, even meeting with him before he left and telling him that she would gladly be revenged on the King of Spain for diverse injuries that we have received. Revenge really is best served cold, or by a pirate with a stabby longsword. King Philip of Spain did the only thing he could. He put a price on Drake's head, 20,000 ducats for the pirate's capture or death. That's more than $8 million today. Philip was not playing. When Drake returned from his various adventures, he was given 10,000 pounds worth of cargo. That's about 900 years' worth of wages for a skilled tradesman at the time, making him one of the wealthiest men in England. The rest of the cargo from Drake's ship went to the Queen, and its monetary worth surpassed the rest of the crown's income for that entire year. Delighted, Lizzie held a grand banquet in Drake's honor, and even had his ship, the Golden Hind, docked on the Thames as a memorial of his voyage. During the festivities, Elizabeth knighted him, but in order to provide some plausible deniability, she asked the French ambassador to hold the sword. You know, just in case any Spanish ambassadors were watching. By this point, English pirates had captured more than 1,000 Spanish merchant ships, and Spain had had quite enough of it, especially after Lizzie's support of the Dutch rebels in the Spanish Netherlands. King Philip II decided the time was ripe to invade, and he built an enormous invasion fleet in 1587. As the shiny new fleet sat in the Spanish harbor at Cadiz, waiting for favorable winds, Sir Francis Drake, at the request of his girl Elizabeth, launched a surprise attack, sinking more than 20 ships and delaying the Armada for more than a year. Eventually, the Invincible Armada set sail in May 1588 to secure control of the English Channel and transport an army to Britain. The fleet consisted of 130 ships carrying 8,000 seamen and almost 20,000 soldiers. Nearly everybody believed the superior Spanish fighting forces would prevail. Elizabeth and her pirates, though, were ready. In the years leading up to the war, the Sea Dogs had given a fair share of their stolen loot to the crown, and Elizabeth hadn't exactly been spending her new wealth on bejeweled pocket watches, know what I mean? She was busy building up a navy of her own. She made Sir John Hawkins treasurer of the Royal Navy, and he proved to be just as good at innovating as he was at raiding. He championed the race-built galleon, a faster warship built for long-range combat, rather than the hack-and-slash boarding action that defined contemporary naval sea battles. By 1578, Elizabeth had a brand new navy that included 25 galleons and 18 smaller warships, which were quicker and better armed than the bulky Spanish fleet. This wasn't nearly enough to combat the Invisible Armada, though, and so Elizabeth was forced to rely on her subjects for more manpower. Out of the more than 200 ships that faced the Armada, nearly 85% of them were either merchant vessels or privateer ships, aka there were a whole lot of pirates. When the Spanish Armada reached the British coast in late July of 1588, just after midnight, the ragtag English Navy was ready for them. They were under the joint command of Lord Charles Howard and the infamous pirate Sir Francis Drake. Third in command was Drake's fellow pirate-in-arms, Sir John Hawkins. Elizabeth had entrusted the defense of her people to a bunch of thieving, swashbuckling pirates. What could go wrong? For the Spanish, everything. Years of attacking Spanish ships had taught the Sea Dogs a thing or two about their weaknesses. The defeat of the Invisible Armada made England a world-class naval power, and the long-range weapons mounted aboard the new British galleons changed naval warfare forever. Elizabeth commemorated her victory by commissioning a new painting of herself, the now famous Armada portrait, which depicts burning Spanish ships in the background. Pirates, as it turns out, aren't so bad after all. So, what is life like for these sea dogs? Ironically, most pirate ships operated democratically. Captains had to be elected, and any treasure captured was shared equally among the crew. Thus, privateering was one of the few professions in which upper and lower classes worked side by side. It was a career that was open to everyone, so long as you were a man. Nearly all seafaring activities, especially piracy, remained heavily gendered, and most pirate ships were total sausage fests. To be fair, there were some solid reasons as to why Elizabethan women weren't sailing the high seas. First of all, piracy was a felony, so being caught meant being arrested and probable death. And even though privateering was technically legal, it was a pretty dangerous job. Beyond the obvious dangers awaiting anybody at sea, shipwrecks, fires, disease, falling overboard, there were plenty of other dangers more specific to piracy. Stealing treasure was a risky and violent business, and death was an ever-present ghost. This wasn't the only reason pirate ships were considered no place for the ladies. While the lifestyle gained a romantic and adventurous reputation, pirates weren't exactly living it up in style. Long voyages at sea meant poor diet and hygiene, which often resulted in things like scurvy and other gnarly diseases. Sometimes pirates attacked passing ships hoping not for jewels and gold coins, but for food and medicine. Men spent weeks at a time in the open ocean, waiting for chances at plunder, so they didn't always have access to ports to replenish their supplies. The damp conditions on board also meant that food staples like dried goods were at risk of mold, and fresh water for drinking often developed a layer of algae scum. Yummy! This is why beer and rum were so popular among pirates. Alcohol, at least, could be stored safely for long sea journeys, and most of it wasn't quick to spoil. So pirates drank spiced alcohol in lieu of water, which was in short supply. Even Navy men got an allotment of grog each day. And we're talking a big allotment, which led to a lot of accidental drunkenness and punishment floggings. But you gotta stay hydrated, right? Similarly, fruits and meats spoiled quickly, so the majority of a pirate's diet consisted of dried or salted meats and hardtack, a type of biscuit that is pretty much as delicious as it sounds. A popular meal among pirates in the West Indies was called salmagundi, a heavily seasoned stew made up of basically anything edible. And I do mean anything. Common ingredients included roasted turtle meat, corned beef, pigeon, or fish marinated in wine, mixed with pickled vegetables and soaked in oil and vinegar. Ransoming beef became a popular tactic for many hunger-stricken pirates. In 1666, French pirates took the entire Venezuelan port city of Maracaibo hostage, and only left once they were supplied with 500 head of cattle. 2 years later, Henry Morgan, of Captain Morgan's rum fame, invaded Puerto del Príncipe in Cuba, also demanding a ransom of 500 cattle. Hi, no, I don't want any money. Cows will do. Just give me all your cows. Or else. Begging for beef wasn't the only downside of living on board a pirate ship. The conditions were also cramped and severely lacking in privacy, which was especially unfortunate when a bunkmate was suffering a bout of seasickness. One can only imagine that college dorm room funk that would have been the norm on such vessels. Fun fact, there was no bathing on pirate ships. The sailors would have to wait for a rainstorm, during which they would all run onto the deck with their bars of soap and get to scrubbing. Now that's a fresh take on communal bathing. In part due to the violent nature of their work, and in part because of the lack of women drawn to the profession, the culture aboard pirate ships turned towards aggressive masculinity. Drinking, gambling, and fighting were encouraged as suitable ways to spend long days at sea, and brotherhood was valued above all else. It was thought that having women aboard would ruin the community of male camaraderie that often developed among the crew, not to mention the fact that the presence of a woman might be, let's say, distracting. When women did come aboard ships, usually it was when they were docked in ports. One could almost guarantee the boys were paying her for the privilege. Thus, the few women who did choose to set sail were vulnerable to harassment and abuse. Thus, most pirates and privateers preferred to keep their wives and daughters safely ashore, rather than subject them to the unhygienic, unsafe ship conditions. And, of course, the men. Men chose seafaring careers out of economic need, rather than a true desire to live or die as a swashbuckler. It was not the most stable of incomes. The death toll was high, and it required spending months of time away from family. Many women did interact with pirates on land when they docked at port, serving as fishwives, oyster women, laundresses, barmaids, and ladies of the evening, but they wouldn't accompany the men on their journeys. This meant the duties on the ship that were traditionally considered feminine tasks, such as cooking, cleaning, and sewing, were necessarily done by men with the help of their ship boys. There was one other reason women were not pirating with the best of them, and it had nothing to do with the grim lifestyle. Historically speaking, women were not allowed to remain on ships because of maritime superstition. It was considered extremely bad luck to have a woman aboard, as it was fervently believed amongst sailors and mariners that women angered the water deities and caused storms, disasters, and bad weather. Because of course they do. I mean, they do have periods. Thus, while there was no law against women working at sea, it was considered seriously taboo. The infamous pirate captain Blackbeard banned women from his ship altogether, and if his crew ever took a woman captive, she was promptly strangled and pitched over the side. Cute Blackbeard. None of this stopped the most enterprising of lady pirates. Throughout history, they have popped up in various periods and places. In the 1800s, Zhang Yi Sao, otherwise known as Qing Shi, a prostitute-turned-pirate lady, commanded the entire Guangdong Pirate Confederation of over 40,000 pirates in the South China Sea. Really, she was one of the most successful pirates ever. But we know of just 3 women who were active on the high seas during the British golden age of piracy. These 3 were, no doubt, not the only women who chose to buck convention and join the pirate's life, but they're the only ones we know about. Partly because women who became sailors or pirates often hid their identities with a scowl and a set of men's clothes. Anne Bonny, Mary Read, and Irish pirate queen Grania Nwalia, otherwise known as Grace O'Malley, might have cross-dressed occasionally. But as they became more comfortable and confident around their crews, they simply wore whatever they liked. In the pamphlet The Trials of Captain John Rackham and Other Pirates, published in 1721, witnesses stated, "When they saw any vessel, gave chase, or attacked, they wore men's clothes, and at other times they wore women's clothes." Most of what we know about Anne Bonny and Mary Read comes from a 1724 book by Captain Charles Johnson called A General History of the Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates. Johnson's book was definitely a mix of fact and fiction, but thanks to a report of a Jamaican pirate trial, we are able to corroborate at least some of it. Anne Bonny, born Anne Cormack, grew up in the late 1690s near Cork, Ireland. She was the daughter of an attorney, William Cormack, and the family maid, which resulted in his wife leaving him in the dust. A bit of a scandalous beginning. William loved his daughter, but to avoid the scandal of the situation, he dressed her as a boy and referred to her as his niece. When the secret got out, William took his maid and his child to start over in Charleston, South Carolina. Anne's mother died when she was just 12 years old, at which point Anne began displaying a fierce and courageous temper, reportedly murdering a servant girl and beating a suitor half to death. To be fair, he did try to get amorously fresh with her. She began frequenting local taverns and giving freely of her favors, much to the dismay of her father. After turning down the betrothal her dad had secured for her, Anne married a sailor, James Bonny. Anne's father was extremely displeased and promptly disowned her. So Anne and James decided to set sail for New Providence, now Nassau Island, in the Bahamas. Because why not run away to the tropics? Except that in the 1700s, Nassau was known as the Republic of Pirates, a great place for the nefarious to hang and hide out. James Bonny embarked on a career as a professional snitch, turning in pirates to Governor Woods, himself a former pirate, and collecting the bounties on their heads. Meanwhile, Anne was befriending and seducing the very pirates James was trying to turn in, and gained a reputation for being not altogether so reserved in point of chastity. While out drinking, Anne met the pirate captain of the Revenge, John Rackham, nicknamed Calico Jack for the colorful pants he wore. Disillusioned with her husband and enchanted by this new pirate captain, Anne and Jack became an item. Sorry, James, professional snitch is not the most attractive look. Jack offered to pay Anne's husband to divorce her, a common practice at the time, but James Bonny refused him. So Anne simply resolved the matter by sailing away to Jamaica with her new pirate lover. Nobody puts Anne Bonny in a corner. Meanwhile, Mary Read, born in England in 1695, had a pretty similar upbringing. Also an illegitimate child, she spent most of her childhood disguised as her dead half-brother as part of an elaborate attempt to scam her wealthy grandmother. Grandma eventually caught on, but Mary's mother continued dressing her as a boy so that she could bring in more income as a male servant. Mary found that pretending to be a man suited her, and she took on the name Mark Read before finding work as a soldier. She served on a British warship carrying bags of gunpowder to the crew before joining the Army of Flanders as a part of the infantry and the cavalry. There, she fell in love with her bunkmate, as you do, and quit the army to marry him. Unfortunately, Mary's husband died soon after their marriage, so she ditched her dresses once more to reprise the name Mark Read, sailing for the West Indies as a sailor on a Dutch ship. But the ship was soon captured by English pirates, who encouraged her to become a part of their crew, thinking Mary was a fellow Englishman. She accepted, and in the late 1710s, Mary Read set sail with Captain Calico Jack. Mary's new crewmates never questioned their new pirate in arms. Mary was, by now, well practiced at living as a man. She wore loose clothing and fought aggressively, cursing and swearing much. And stress and poor diet kept her menstrual cycle mostly at bay. Imagine Mary's surprise when she learned that Captain Calico Jack's crew already had a female member, Anne Bonny. Living life aboard with her lover, Jack, Anne walked the gangways dressed as a woman until it was time for battle, at which point she'd don a disguise. Loose tunic, trousers, a small cap, and 2 pistols tucked into her sash. As you can imagine, Mark and Anne hit it off right away. And eventually, Mary confessed her secret to Anne, and the two became closer than ever. Meanwhile, Calico Jack grew increasingly jealous that Anne was spending lots of alone time with this new man aboard his crew. One day, he burst into Mark's cabin intent on killing him. Mary merely opened her blouse to prove that she was a woman. And Jack, hopefully at least a little bit embarrassed, agreed to keep her secret as well. Jack and Anne had been having a grand old time together, pirating merchant ships along the coast of Jamaica. Although having a woman aboard was highly unusual, Captain Jack's crew had learned the hard way not to complain. When one shipmate did, Anne decided to shut him up by stabbing him directly in the heart. Does anybody else here have problems, or are we good? In time, Anne's crewmates learned to respect Anne's wit and penchant for violence. Legend has it that when a passing French ship saw Anne wielding an axe over a mangled corpse on deck, they surrendered their ship immediately without even putting up a fight. The corpse, as it turns out, was merely the remnants of a dressmaker's mannequin smeared with fake blood, a deception of Anne's own clever devising. Captain Jack's crew continued plundering the seas around Jamaica, capturing vessels and stealing their treasures. Anne and Mary were always in the thick of it, and during battle, they fought side by side, wearing billowing jackets and trousers, wielding pistols in one hand and machetes in the other. One of their victims later recounted, "They were very active on board and willing to do anything." The two women even led a daring raid against a schooner, shooting and cursing as they sacked the ship, and holding their captives for several days before releasing them. Hey, at least they didn't stab them in their hearts. Unfortunately, this raid caught the attention of the governor of the Bahamas, who declared that Calico Jack and his crew were enemies to the crown of Great Britain, with Mary and Anne being specifically singled out as dangerous. Things came to a head one late October night near Negril Point, Jamaica. One of the crew were either passed out or drunk, so Mary and Anne went above deck to get some air. They soon noticed one of the governor's vessels sailing towards them and shouted for their crewmates to stand and fight. Jack was one of the few men steady on their feet enough to attempt to help, and together they began firing at the governor's ship, which immediately counterattacked. With half of his drunken crew hiding in the ship's hold, Jack signaled surrender and called for quarter. Anne and Mary, however, had no intention of surrendering, even when the governor's men boarded. They remained on deck and faced the men by themselves, swinging swords and firing bullets with abandon. Mary was so disgusted by her cowardly crewmates that she stopped fighting long enough to yell down into the hold, "If there's a man among ye, you'll come up and fight like the man ye are to be." When nobody came up, she fired a shot into the hold and killed one of her crewmates. Hardcore. Despite their battle prowess, she and Anne were overpowered and taken prisoner, along with the rest of Jack's crew. Calico Jack and his men were tried in a court in Spanish Town, Jamaica, where they were immediately convicted of piracy and hanged. Mary and Anne were also tried and found guilty, but both did something we learned about in Season 3. They pleaded the belly. By claiming they were pregnant, they were saved, at least for a while. It is unclear how both women lived out the remainder of their lives. Mary Read is said to have died in prison from a fever a year later, while Anne Bonny was eventually freed, but died soon after as well. We can only hope they went to their deaths with their trusty machetes in hand. Anne and Mary gained fame for their seafaring exploits in the Caribbean, but there was one pirate dame who was plundering closer to home. I'm talking about none other than the Irish pirate queen, Grania Nawalia, who you will often find called Grace O'Malley. She was born in the 1530s in Ireland. Grania grew up in Belcaire Castle near Westport. This was a time when King Henry VIII was still in power over in England, and he was hungry to conquer the island to the west. Grania was raised in a noble coastal seafaring family led by her father, the chief of the O'Malley clan. Her father had extensive lands and a ship of fleets in Clew Bay, and Grania was hungry to learn the family business, which was piracy. When she asked to go on an expedition, he told her she couldn't go because her long hair would get all caught up in the ship's ropes. So 11-year-old Grania promptly cut off her hair, which earned her what we think was a nickname, Grania Whale, which is Gaelic for bald. She'd rock short hair for the rest of her life. Grania became a fierce leader at sea and on land. The Irish political landscape was fraught, to put it mildly, with England breathing directly down their necks. She was determined to defend her home and her people from Queen Elizabeth and her generals, who were hell-bent on trying to bring unruly Ireland under the crown's thumb. At 16, Grania married the heir of the O'Flaherty clan, Donald, who also had a penchant for piracy and who was more than willing to show Grania the ropes. Married for almost a decade, Donald and Grania would lord over the coastline of Ireland together, defending their castles and acquiring strategic strongholds through conquest, all the while raising their 3 children. Who says a lady can't do it all? By 1560, the Pirate Queen had fully lived up to her clan's motto, powerful by land and by sea. She led a 20-ship fleet of hundreds of men that ruled over the Irish Sea from Clare Island. They raided fishing vessels, battled rival clans, and attacked English and Spanish ships that strayed too close to the western coastlines. When Donald was killed by a rival clan in 1565, Grania went on a revenge streak. She fought off and defeated his killers, then claimed their castle for herself. When her next lover was murdered, Grania once again went on the offensive, attacking their stronghold and killing her lover's murderers. This particular revenge spree earned her the nickname the Dark Lady of Duna. Grania's next marriage was straight power politics. She aligned herself with the leader of the Burkes of Connacht, a gent named Richard Iron Dick Burke. Yup, you heard me. In accordance with Irish law, she married him for 1 year certain, which gave them both the chance to bow out at the end of that time if either one of them weren't still feeling it. He can't have been too bad, as she soon became pregnant. Legend has it that, hours after giving birth, at sea, pirates took the opportunity to ambush her ship. Did Grania cower below? You bet your cutlass she didn't. She wrapped her son in a blanket and went up on deck, rallying her crew and capturing the enemy vessel. Grania is taking that Beyoncé song about having the children and getting back to business to a whole new place. When the year had passed, she dismissed Iron Dick from his marriage oath. I mean, he'd served his purpose, but made sure to keep possession of his fortresses. Politics, indeed. By the 1570s, Grania was spending most of her time fighting the English, who were trying to deprive her of her lands and power. The Irish clans had been operating far too independently for Queen Lizzie's liking, and the complaints of piracy had become impossible to ignore. The English were trying to govern the Irish by force, while the Irish continued to resist their encroachment. Skirmishes between Grania's personal army and English generals were common, and there was no apparent end in sight. In 1574, Grace was forced to repel an English siege against her stronghold at Rockfleet Castle, and then she spent 2 brief periods in prison. The first time, she was imprisoned for pillaging the lands of an English earl, who described her as a woman that hath imprudently passed the part of womanhood, and been a great spoiler, and chief commander and director of thieves and murderers at sea, to spoil this province. I can only imagine Grania would have loved being described as a great spoiler. The second time, she was captured during another raid against the English at the ripe old age of 56, at which point one English official called her the most famous feminine sea captain, a notorious woman in all the coasts of Ireland. Yes, she was. By 1593, Grania was losing the fight against the English. Her eldest son had been killed, and her youngest had been imprisoned by the English governor of Connaught, Sir Bingham. This guy was a serious killjoy with a vendetta against the pirate queen. He attacked her lands and took over her castle, and seemed poised to keep on coming. Ever the pirate, Grania decided it was time for a parley. She picked up her quill and wrote directly to Queen Elizabeth, demanding the release of her son and the return of her lands. In return, Grania offered to pledge her allegiance to Queen Elizabeth, to invade with sword and fire all your highness's enemies, wheresoever they are or shall be. You know, as long as she was allowed to continue her piracy without English interference. This brazen letter landed in the hands of Lizzie's Secretary of State, Lord Burleigh, who was intrigued by Grania's offer and invited her to London. Upon her arrival, Grania was asked to provide written answers to 18 questions. After reading them, Queen Elizabeth agreed to meet her face-to-face at Greenwich Palace. We don't know for sure what happened at this meeting, or even that it did happen. Oh, to be a fly on that wall. What we do know is that Queen Elizabeth I and the Pirate Queen had much in common. They were both ambitious women in their 60s who had carved out careers in male-dominated fields. They both spent their days talking politics and warfare, and were looked to as courageous and intelligent leaders of men. When they met in Greenwich, their conversation was supposedly conducted in Latin, as Grania had been educated in a manner befitting her upper-class status, and Gaelic was one of the few languages Elizabeth didn't speak. Their meeting would have been steeped in mutual admiration. Elizabeth was at the height of her powers, and her opulent wardrobe always dazzled, but she had never led a life of adventure or killed a man like Grania. Thus, out of respect, Elizabeth allowed Grania to list her grievances against Governor Bingham, and then, perhaps out of compassion for a fellow female trailblazer, she granted all of Grania's requests. Lizzie ordered the release of Grania's son, the restoration of her lands, and said she could continue her piracy on the Irish coasts as long as Grania did not continue her rebellion against the crown. The two queens both departed the meeting satisfied, but they would never meet again. Grania would die in 1603, famed for her exploits, and Elizabeth would die that same year, a not-so-secret supporter of the pirates who helped enrich and defend her. So let's lift our glasses of grog and a toast. Long live the Pirate Queens. Did you love this episode? I hope so. You'll find more like it over on my Patreon, where I'm currently publishing 2 fresh episodes a month. To find out all about it, have a look at the show notes or go to my website, theexploresspodcast.com, and click on Become a Patron. Thank you to the moon and back to Carly Quinn for her help researching and writing this episode. And much love to Joshua Stackhouse for my theme music and Mr. Exploress for my logo. Until next time.